Are you wondering how often you're supposed to pee? Well, hopefully this video can answer that question for you. My name is Kristen Norwick. I am a pelvic physiotherapist. I have a master's degree in physiotherapy and extensive training in pelvic health. Pelvic health encompasses your whole pelvic region, including your bladder function. Let's get into it. Research shows that the recommended and average amount of times you should be emptying your bladder per day is 6 to 9 times. If you're peeing less than that or more than that and you're outside of that range, then there's probably something that you can optimize in order to get into that range. The great news is that there are treatment options out there for you. So in this video, I want to explain to you what you can do if you're not actually going enough or if you're peeing too frequently. What if you're not peeing enough? That means you're probably waiting too long in between each time you empty your bladder, and you could actually be going more frequently. This could be because you're not drinking enough water, or it could be that you're holding your bladder for too long. So there's a couple different things you can do. In terms of your water intake, ideally you want to be drinking 6 to 8 glasses of water per day. So if you're not getting that amount of water, you can start to slowly increase that. However, if there's a medical reason why you shouldn't, absolutely consult with your doctor before increasing your water intake. The other reason why you might not be emptying your bladder enough is that you're going too long between trying to empty your bladder. So ideally you're emptying your bladder every 2 to 4 hours. And if you're not doing that, you might be delaying it or delaying your urge. Sometimes this happens because of your lifestyle and your routine or your workplace or something like that, where actually going to the washroom isn't that accessible, or you're so caught up in your work that you forget and you aren't going to the washroom enough. So oftentimes when I work with my clients, I offer certain strategies. Like if they're in a workplace that they do have access to the washroom, maybe setting a timer to check in, do I need to go right now? And reminding themselves to check with their bladder to check if it feels full. You ideally don't want to empty your bladder if it doesn't feel full. We call that just in case emptying. So ideally you don't do that, but you do set a timer to check in. Am I full yet? Okay, actually, yeah, I could go. And then you go, and that might actually increase the number of times that you're going throughout the day because you've just brought more awareness to your bladder. And then the more tricky situation is if you have a routine or a workplace where you don't have access to a washroom for 4+ hours in a row. That is more tricky. Ideally, for your health and your bladder and pelvic health, being creative around a solution for actually being able to empty your bladder in that time frame is ideal. I recognize though that that's not possible for everyone. But if this is a concern for you, then I think it is worth perhaps getting a bit creative, discussing with your pelvic physiotherapist, ways that you might be able to figure it out. This is going to be a bit more individual. And I have worked with people who have been able to speak with their employer or their workplace about the fact that they don't have enough opportunities to empty their bladder. This should be something that you have opportunities for when you're working. And if it's in a different setting, maybe being able to get creative about solutions. If you're going too long between emptying your bladder, there are a couple things that can change and adapt in your bladder and your pelvic region. So this is my model of the bladder here. I'll take off the lid so you can see the inside, and you can see that the bladder lining is this red, which means that it's a muscle. And so if you're holding your bladder too long, you might be allowing it to overstretch. And overstretching of the bladder can actually change the quality of the muscle of the lining of the bladder. Usually this won't happen with short-term incidences, like if you sometimes hold your bladder too long every now and then. But over a long period of time, that can cause some changes. And if the muscle of the lining of the bladder changes, it can actually become weakened or less good at emptying. And so what sometimes we'll see is that after someone has chronically held their bladder too long, that they start to deal with other bladder things like incontinence, they're dealing with bladder leakage, or their frequency goes way up and they can no longer hold it in, and so they're actually feeling like they have to go way more frequently, and they're running to the washroom, they're going in the middle of the night, and it's impacting their sleep. So there's multiple different things that can happen with chronically holding your bladder too long. So I strongly recommend that you start to see if you can empty your bladder 6 to 9 times per day and start to make those small changes to see if it's possible. To recap, you may want to increase your water intake, or you may want to build something into your schedule that allows you to check in with your bladder to see if it's full so that you empty it when it is full and not ignore it. Now I'm going to talk about what you can do if you empty your bladder over 9 times per day. So what this means is that you're emptying more frequently than is recommended. Ideally, you're emptying your bladder every 2 to 4 hours. And so if you're going more frequently than that, there are a few things that we can do in order for you to see if you can start to go less frequently. The first reason why you might be going more frequently is that your urine is actually irritating the lining of your bladder. So if we look at the bladder model, I'll take the top off so you can see inside. So you can see on the inside here, there's the lining of the bladder that the urine will be touching. So if the urine is irritating at all, it can actually irritate this lining, which will then make this muscle more twitchy or irritated, and then it'll want to empty more frequently. So it's protecting itself from that irritated urine. How we can make your urine less irritated is by drinking enough water. So ideally you're drinking 6 to 8 glasses of water per day, but also limiting your intake of bladder irritants. So bladder irritants are caffeine, carbonation, and alcohol. Ideally, every time you drink a cup or a glass of a bladder irritant, so for example, a cup of coffee in the morning, you would drink an additional glass of water of about equal volume to counteract the irritating properties of that bladder irritant. If you drank 6 to 8 glasses of water per day, but then you had a cup of coffee in the morning and a glass of wine at night, then technically you should be drinking 8 to 10 glasses of water today to dilute that bladder irritant. Once you've diluted the bladder irritants and your urine is less irritating to the lining of your bladder, it seems counterintuitive because you're drinking more volume, but actually your urine should be less irritating to your bladder and you should feel like you need to urinate less frequently. Now, there could be medical reasons why this might not be the right choice for you. So absolutely speak with your doctor and or your pelvic physiotherapist about this to ensure it's the right option for you. The other thing that might be happening is your bladder can sometimes just get in the habit of emptying more frequently. So this lining of your bladder, that's the muscle, should stretch as your bladder fills. So the bladder should stretch. If your bladder gets more used to not stretching as far, then sometimes it can give you the signal that it's full before it actually is. And then you'll feel like, okay, I need to go, I need to empty my bladder. So this is a little bit more of a habitual thing. It can happen slowly over time. Maybe you started out by emptying just in case every time you left your house, or emptying twice before bed just in case. And these things, don't worry, most people have no idea that this can actually impact your bladder habit. So don't worry. That's why I'm teaching you this here, because so many people are in the same boat. And just over time, slowly, your bladder gets more and more used to emptying more frequently, and it gets less and less used to stretching, and those stretch receptors of your muscles just basically don't practice it. So they just get less used to it. And so in order to impact your bladder habit, ideally you would work closely with a pelvic physiotherapist one-on-one for that, for bladder retraining is what we call it. The main principles are slowly starting to train your bladder to be able to stretch a bit more and go a bit longer between each empty. So for example, if you're emptying every 30 minutes right now, maybe start off super slow and see if you could challenge yourself to empty every 45 minutes and then maybe every 50 minutes, and do a slow incremental shift over several weeks or several months, depending on what works best for you and what you're more comfortable with, working your way towards that goal of being able to go 2 hours between empties. Sometimes people can build this up over a couple weeks, and sometimes I've worked with people who it's taken them over a year. Everyone's different, so don't worry about feeling like it's taking too long. And like I said, a pelvic physiotherapist can absolutely help guide you through that process so you feel safe and comfortable doing it. The other reason why you might be going more frequently could be because your pelvic floor muscles aren't contracting as well as they could, and or relaxing as well as they could. So if we look at the pelvic model here, here's my pelvic model. Your pubic bone's at the front of your pelvis, your tailbone's at the back, and if you look from below, your two sit bones are here. These are your pelvic floor muscles. And when you want to hold your bladder, so you don't want your bladder to empty, your pelvic floor muscles should tighten and they should be strong enough to send a signal to your bladder, here's your bladder, that now is not the time to empty. And so what's really cool actually is as your pelvic floor muscles tighten, your lining of your bladder actually relaxes, allowing the urine to stay in your bladder and not get squeezed out by the muscle of your bladder. Then, when you do want to empty your bladder, your pelvic floor muscles relax and open, and that sends a signal to your bladder to squeeze and empty all of the contents out of itself. So if you're going more frequently, there could be two different things going on with the pelvic floor muscles. The first thing is when you do go to empty, you're not relaxing your pelvic floor completely, and then your bladder isn't emptying completely. And so you feel like you need to go more frequently because actually every time you're going, you're not fully emptying. But the other thing that could be happening is your pelvic floor muscles might be too weak or too tired. And so when you ask them to contract to tell your bladder, no, now's not the time to empty, I'm not actually full yet, just wait, your muscles aren't strong enough to send your bladder that signal, and you feel this really strong sense of urge, like, actually, no, I have to go right now, I can't hold it. So you may have one of those things going on, you may have both. Everyone's going to be individual in this. So the best way to figure that out is to chat with your doctor, see a pelvic physiotherapist. You may need to get a referral from your doctor to see a pelvic physiotherapist, and they can assess exactly what you need in order to get on top of your bladder frequency. To recap, you might not be emptying your bladder enough, so less than 6 times, or you might be emptying it too much, so more than 9 times per day. In either of those scenarios, checking to see if your fluid intake is the issue, so are you drinking enough water and are you drinking too many bladder irritants? If your schedule is the issue, so maybe you're just in the habit of emptying too frequently, or you're in the habit of ignoring your bladder, or are your pelvic floor muscles involved? Are they too weak? Are they too strong? And are you having difficulty using them? In any scenario, chatting with your doctor and chatting with a pelvic physiotherapist is a really great next step. Good luck. I really hope that you can get on top of your bladder frequency soon. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the comments below. And if you want to see one of our physiotherapists over video call, you can book in the link in the description of this video. Take care.